1 point. That is the exact margin Felipe Massa lost the 2008 Formula One World Championship by. 17 years later, that single point has turned into a lawsuit that could cost Formula One $64 million. The true financial exposure could possibly be a lot more than that. This isn't a story about a crash. It is a story about what a crash is worth. Taking a historical racing result into a modern corporate courtroom completely changes the game for a global sport. When a Grand Prix ends, everyone expects the result to stay in the record books forever. The global broadcasting rights, massive corporate sponsorships, and seasonal prize money all rely on those final standings. Now, this aggressive legal move bypasses standard sporting rules and attacks the sport's business side directly. We are looking at a calculated attempt to audit the past. Massa is putting a hard, undeniable price tag on a trophy awarded almost 2 decades ago. The governing bodies of global motorsport are now answering for a highly specific event that permanently changed a world championship. Let us get the facts straight first, because this case hinges on them. The whole thing started in Singapore back in 2008. On lap 14, Renault driver Nelson Piquet Jr. deliberately crashed his car into a wall.
Behind all the traffic. Oh, big crash! That's Nelson Piquet.
This move forces the safety car out, bunching up the entire field. Felipe Massa, who was leading the race for Ferrari at the time, pits under that safety car. In the total chaos of the pit lane, Ferrari sends him back out with the fuel hose still attached.
Oh no! That's a big mistake! Massa's gone!
The timeline of the World Championship fractured in a matter of seconds. Massa loses nearly a lap trying to fix the disaster and finishes in 13th place. Fernando Alonso, who happens to be Piquet's own Renault teammate, capitalizes on the situation and wins the race. Massa didn't know it yet, but that pit stop just cost him the championship. That November, down in Brazil, he would lose the title to Lewis Hamilton by exactly 1 point. The following season, the hidden truth surfaced when Piquet came clean. He publicly stated that Renault ordered him to crash. The fallout was fast and severe, forcing the team's principal, Flavio Briatore, and their technical director out of the sport. The event became known as Crashgate, cementing itself as one of the biggest scandals in F1 history. For a decade, the narrative remained officially closed, while the sport moved into a massively lucrative new era. Then, the transition from a sporting scandal into a high-stakes corporate lawsuit happened in 2023. Bernie Ecclestone, who ran Formula One at the time of the crash, gave an interview with a massive admission. He openly admitted that he and then FIA president Max Mosley knew about the crash before the season even ended. Despite knowing about the manipulation, they chose not to act. Formula One stayed quiet to protect the show. Acting on the information would have blown up the championship fight in public, damaging the product at a terrible time. Massa's lawyers are leaning heavily on this admission. They argue that if F1 had stepped in when it should have, Massa would have been champion. That is the specific allegation this entire case is built on. Before we get into the money, and it gets very specific, if you're new here, this channel breaks down the business side of F1 that nobody else covers. It is entirely free to join, but it helps us more than you can imagine if you're subscribed for the next one. So, coming back to the topic, how do you even calculate what a championship is worth? You cannot simply guess at the market value of historical prestige. The calculation demands a strict look at a professional athlete's peak earning years. Massa's legal team audited his career and put a precise number on it, roughly £64 million, or around 82 million US dollars. There is actual concrete financial math supporting that exact figure. The first core component is basic salary. A world champion earns a different tier of contract than a driver who finishes second. A world title fundamentally changes a driver's baseline market value for the rest of their racing days. It elevates them into an elite bracket that guarantees much higher base pay across multiple seasons. The staggering financial gap between the hypothetical career of 2008 world champion Felipe Massa and the career he actually had is the biggest single line item. The second component focuses heavily on sponsorship and commercial value. Crowned champions get better personal sponsorship deals, longer contracts, and significantly bigger endorsement value. Global brands pay top dollar to align themselves exclusively with a world champion. Missing out on that title represents a severe restriction on a driver's long-term earning potential. That is a real, calculable market. The third component is a highly specific bonus. Ferrari reportedly had a £1.7 million bonus directly tied to Massa winning the title. That one is completely concrete, as it is contractual and not a projected estimation of future earnings. Stack those distinct financial losses together across a racing career, factor in the lost commercial leverage, and Massa's team gets to £64 million. Whether a United Kingdom court agrees with that math is a completely different question, which brings us to the legal complications. Massa isn't just suing one single entity, he is suing three totally distinct parties: Formula One management, acting as the commercial rights holder, the FIA, operating as the sport's governing body, and Bernie Ecclestone personally. That massive separation of defendants matters deeply because each of them has a different type of legal exposure. If F1's commercial arm is found liable, that poses a huge corporate liability question regarding how it affects the business and its valuation. If the FIA is found liable, that is a devastating governance failure for a non-profit regulating the entire sport. If Ecclestone personally is found liable, that is purely about an individual's conduct as the sport's most powerful decision-maker at the time. Here is the absolute most critical legal detail regarding the ongoing stakes. A UK High Court judge has already definitively ruled that the court will not strip Hamilton's title or declare Massa the rightful champion. This case was never going to successfully rewrite the official record books. It is purely about damages, exclusively about the money. Massa's legal team has effectively used corporate liability laws against the very organizations that govern the grid. The timeline of the litigation has been completely relentless. In March 2024, Massa officially files the lawsuit. By November 2025, a High Court judge rules his core claim that F1 unlawfully conspired to keep the crash quiet can go to a full public trial. In March 2026, that same court forcefully orders F1, the FIA, and Ecclestone to pay Massa £250,000 in legal costs just for this preliminary stage. Then, in June 2026, the defendants executed a highly unusual and deeply aggressive legal maneuver. They skipped past the Court of Appeal entirely and went straight to the UK Supreme Court. They are aggressively trying to get the whole case thrown out before it ever reaches a full trial. Because of this aggressive escalation, the case is currently paused and entirely frozen in place. The entire sport is waiting on one of the highest courts in the country to decide if this high-stakes legal action even continues. Here is the real business risk for F1, and it is exponentially bigger than $64 million. If the Supreme Court rejects the appeal and this proceeds to a full public trial, F1's own executives could be heavily cross-examined. They would have to testify under oath about exactly what they knew and when they knew it. That is far beyond a simple financial payout risk. That is an existential, reputational, and governance risk for a sport that has spent the last decade rebuilding its global image. Fans and sponsors in the Drive to Survive era demand corporate transparency. The global broadcasters and massive corporate sponsors currently pouring billions into the sport rely heavily on the unshakable integrity of the product. A sprawling public trial detailing systemic cover-ups directly threatens that fragile corporate trust. Furthermore, a definitive legal victory for Massa creates a catastrophic precedent problem for the entire ecosystem. If a driver can successfully extract tens of millions of dollars by suing over a race-changing decision from 17 years ago, what does that mean for the future? It practically opens the door for every fiercely contested stewarding call since to become a lawsuit. Every controversial penalty or safety car could turn into a multi-million-dollar corporate battle. That systemic, grid-wide vulnerability is the real reason this case is worth so much more to F1 than the massive number printed on the claim form. They are currently fighting a desperate, high-stakes battle to protect the absolute finality of their sporting governance. The Supreme Court hasn't ruled yet on the appeal. When it does finally issue its decision, we will be covering exactly what it means for Massa, for Hamilton's legacy, and for F1's overarching bottom line. Subscribe so you don't miss it.